The diplomatic cruiser Resolute Dawn drifted silently in orbit above the contested world of Varus Prime, its reflective hull catching the cold glint of distant stars. Admiral Marcus Rowe adjusted the stiff collar of his ceremonial uniform. His jaw clenched as he surveyed the gathering storm below. Years of bloody conflict had led to this fragile moment of peace. A summit between humanity's interstellar alliance and the proud, mysterious Averii dominion. Marcus had survived countless battles, his war-worn body carrying the weight of every lost soldier, every failed mission. Negotiation wasn't his arena, but command had insisted. His reputation as a steadfast leader made him the perfect symbol of human resolve, or so the politicians claimed. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Marcus turned to see the Averii delegation arrive. They stepped with predatory grace, their crystalline armor gleaming like sharp-edged moonlight. At the center of the formation stood Lady Alara Vale, her presence commanding even among her formidable entourage. She was striking, taller than any human, her skin shimmering in fluid pulses of silver-blue light. Intricate lines of bioluminescent markings traced the curves of her face, neck, and arms, glowing faintly in tune with her heartbeat. Her piercing, molten gold eyes locked onto Marcus, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them. "Admiral Rowe," she spoke, her voice a deep, resonant melody. "You stand as the face of your people." Marcus inclined his head respectfully, holding her gaze. "And you, Lady Vale, are the soul of yours." The air between them vibrated with unspoken tension, sharp and electric. The negotiations were brutal from the outset. Every term, every offer, every compromise was met with unyielding resistance. Alara's glowing tattoos flared brighter during heated exchanges, a silent display of restrained emotion. Marcus admired her intensity even as it frustrated him. She was impossible, proud, unyielding, her words as sharp as any weapon. But beneath that fierce exterior, he sensed something more, something she kept buried under rigid control. Hours passed, and tempers frayed. At the peak of a particularly volatile argument, the ship's lights flickered, followed by a deep, mechanical groan. Marcus froze, instincts honed by decades of combat roaring to life. Suddenly, the ship's emergency alarms blared. "Hostile forces detected." A panicked voice crackled over the comms. "Internal breach. Assassins on board." Before anyone could react, the chamber's reinforced doors exploded inward with a deafening blast. Masked figures in advanced combat armor stormed through the smoke, energy rifles blazing. Marcus lunged toward Alara, yanking her down behind the conference table as plasma fire seared the walls. Her eyes widened, startled by the sudden, protective act. "Stay low," he barked, already drawing his sidearm. Alara recovered swiftly, her hand brushing a concealed blade at her hip. "I need no protection from you." With a fluid twist, she vaulted over the table, her blade slicing through the first attacker with deadly precision. Her glowing tattoos burned fiercely now, shimmering with a pulse-like intensity as she moved with lethal grace. Marcus fired precise shots, covering her flank as they fought back to back. Despite the chaos, there was a strange rhythm to their combat, as though their movements were instinctively aligned. When the last attacker fell, gasping his final breath, Marcus surveyed the ruined chamber, his pulse still pounding. He turned to Alara, chest heaving, blood splattered across his uniform. Her breathing was shallow, her luminous gaze locked on him. For a brief, charged moment, there was no war, no politics, only shared survival, raw and unguarded. Before either could speak, a fresh wave of alarms erupted. "We need to move," Marcus growled, grabbing her arm. She didn't resist, her skin faintly warm beneath his calloused fingers. The sensation lingered longer than it should have. Together, they fled deeper into the ship, knowing that whatever fragile alliance they'd forged was the only thing standing between them and certain death. The shuttle's engines sputtered violently as it tore through the planet's toxic atmosphere, metal groaning under the strain of entry. Sparks erupted from the damaged console, and Marcus Rowe fought the failing controls with clenched teeth, the violent turbulence rattling every bolt of the battered craft. "Hold on!" he barked over the piercing alarms. Lady Alara Vale clung to the survival harness, her glowing skin dimming under the harsh red emergency lights. Despite the chaos, her gaze remained sharp, scanning the data feeds with practiced precision. "The stabilizers are collapsing," she shouted. "This vessel won't survive impact. Neither will we if we eject now." Marcus yanked the manual override, stabilizing the plummeting craft just enough to guide it toward a jagged canyon below. "Brace for." The shuttle hit the rocky ground with bone-jarring force, skidding across the barren terrain before slamming into a shattered ridge. The world spun into chaos, metal shrieking in protest before everything fell still. Marcus groaned, forcing his eyes open through a haze of pain. Blood trickled down his temple, stinging his eyes. He shoved off a twisted bulkhead pinning his leg and staggered to his feet, lungs heaving against the planet's thin, toxic air. "Alara!" He stumbled toward her crumpled form. Her crystalline armor was fractured, faint cracks spiderwebbing along her bioluminescent markings. Her breathing was shallow, her tattoos flickering weakly. "Stay with me," Marcus urged, gently lifting her into his arms. Her skin was startlingly cold, her usually radiant glow dimmed to a pale shimmer. Her eyelids fluttered open, molten gold eyes locking onto his with disoriented intensity. The air, not safe. Marcus cursed under his breath, realizing the shuttle's life support systems were dead. He grabbed an emergency respirator from the wreckage, securing it over her mouth. Alara's trembling fingers brushed against his wrist, lingering longer than necessary. A silent, instinctive plea. "You're not dying on me," he vowed fiercely, hoisting her against his chest. He forced his battered body into motion, staggering toward a distant outcrop that offered partial shelter from the punishing winds. His breath burned with every step, but he pushed through the agony, driven by sheer will. The rocky overhang provided just enough cover from the acidic rain now falling in icy sheets. Marcus laid Alara down gently, adjusting the respirator as her breathing steadied. Her markings glimmered faintly, still far too dim for his liking. He collapsed beside her, gasping for breath. Cold seeped into his bones as the harsh wind howled outside their fragile refuge. His survival training kicked in fire. They needed heat, fast. Digging into the emergency kit, he scraped together a makeshift fire starter and ignited a weak, flickering flame. Its feeble warmth wasn't enough, not against the planet's relentless chill. Alara stirred beside him, her eyelids fluttering open again. She watched him struggle with the fire, her expression unreadable yet intensely focused. "The cold will kill you first," she rasped, her voice strained but firm. "I'm fine," Marcus lied, his hands trembling from exhaustion and frostbite. Without warning, Alara sat up, wincing at the effort. Her fingers brushed against his, her bioluminescent tattoos flaring briefly at the contact. "Our bodies generate heat through contact," she murmured, her gaze piercing through the dim light. "It is how we survive in the frozen wastelands of Vareth." Marcus's breath hitched, understanding her meaning instantly. "This is survival," she insisted, her voice steadier now, though her expression held something deeper, something raw and unspoken. Nothing more. Before he could respond, she guided his trembling hands to her glowing forearms, her skin warmer now beneath his fingertips. His calloused hands lingered, feeling the strange, electric pulse beneath her flesh, like holding living starlight. She shifted closer, her long frame enveloping his smaller form with graceful, deliberate purpose. Her touch radiated heat, chasing away the bitter cold clawing at his skin. Marcus tensed but couldn't deny the warmth blooming where their bodies pressed together. His breath mingled with hers, the respirator momentarily forgotten as her face hovered inches from his. Her golden eyes flickered with something unreadable, both vulnerable and fierce. "This is how we survive," she whispered again, though the words held a different weight now. Marcus gently cupped her face, his thumb tracing the glowing lines along her cheek. marveling at the way her light responded to his touch. A soft, shuddering breath escaped her lips, her eyes half closing at the sensation. They stayed like that for a moment, suspended between necessity and something far more profound. Their shared warmth and closeness blurred the lines of survival and connection in a way neither could ignore. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that small, fragile shelter, they clung to each other. Not just for warmth, but for something both of them had long denied. A reason to keep fighting. As the distant sound of approaching searchcraft echoed faintly through the storm, Marcus tightened his hold on Alara, knowing their temporary haven would rocky outcrop, slicing through the twisted remains of the dead shuttle like jagged knives. Inside the makeshift shelter, the dim fire cast flickering shadows across the uneven stone walls. Marcus rose stirred from restless half-sleep, his combat-honed senses snapping to full alert. His hand instinctively sought the blaster at his hip, fingers tightening around the worn grip. But it wasn't danger that had roused him. It was the warmth pressed against him. Lady Alara Vale lay curled beside him, her long, lithe form partially draped over his. Her bioluminescent tattoos shimmered softly now, glowing with renewed strength, a quiet rhythm pulsing under her translucent skin like liquid light. In the dim firelight, she looked impossibly otherworldly, yet painfully real. Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. Their desperate closeness the night before had been about survival, nothing more, or so he told himself. Yet, even now, her presence was impossible to ignore. He felt her breathing, steady and warm, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. His pulse betrayed him, quickening against his will. Suddenly, Alara stirred, her sharp eyes fluttering open, her gaze locked onto his, intense and unreadable molten gold catching the faint glow of her markings. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside seemed distant, inconsequential. "You are awake," she said softly, her voice still rough from exhaustion but steady. "Could say the same about you," Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral despite the tightness in his chest. "How are you feeling?" Her gaze lingered on him, searching. "Better, thanks to you." Her fingertips brushed his forearm, a fleeting touch that sent an unexpected warmth through him. He shifted, sitting up carefully. "Good. We need to move before whoever shot us down finishes the job." Alara nodded, her expression hardening as she pulled herself upright with practiced grace. Despite her recovery, Marcus could see the weariness etched in her every movement. She masked it well, pride and defiance in every step, but he'd spent too many years reading people not to notice. "Any idea who's after us?" he asked, grabbing his survival pack. "The list is long," Alara admitted grimly. "Political enemies, war profiteers, perhaps even factions within my own dominion." Marcus frowned, tightening the strap of his blaster holster. "Sounds like we've both made powerful enemies." Her lips quirked in something resembling a bitter smile. Power invites betrayal. They shared a brief, understanding look, soldiers from different worlds, yet bound by the same harsh truth. The next few hours were a grueling march through the shattered, windswept canyons. Jagged rock spires loomed like broken swords, and the air remained harsh and toxic, forcing Marcus to ration the last of their respirator filters. Despite the hostile terrain, Alara navigated with fluid precision, her long strides tireless even as exhaustion tugged at her features. Marcus stayed close, keeping his blaster at the ready. He trusted her skill, but survival instincts ran too deep to ignore. As they crested a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, Marcus spotted something through the swirling mist, a faint energy signature flickering against the horizon, a structure partially buried in the rocky landscape. "See that?" he pointed. Alara narrowed her eyes, scanning the distant shape. "Old Dominion outpost. Abandoned after the last border skirmish. Think we'll find supplies there? Possibly, if it hasn't already been scavenged." With no better options, they pressed on, descending into the ravine toward the forgotten stronghold. The outpost was a decaying relic of war, its walls scorched and broken, half buried by time and weather. Faint traces of old Averii tech still pulsed faintly along the fractured walls, casting ghostly blue light through the ruins. Marcus secured the entrance while Alara moved deeper inside, her keen eyes scanning for anything useful. The air inside was still and silent, the lingering echoes of past battles etched into every stone. As they searched, Marcus couldn't help but watch her. The precision of her movements, the way her glowing tattoos flared softly with every step. She was strength wrapped in elegance, equal parts warrior and mystery. "What is it?" she asked suddenly, catching his gaze. Marcus shook his head, forcing himself back to the task at hand. "Nothing. Just thinking." Her expression softened ever so slightly, though her tone remained guarded. "Thinking rarely leads to anything good." Before he could respond, a faint mechanical hum echoed from deeper within the outpost. They froze, exchanging wary looks. "Someone's here," Marcus muttered, drawing his blaster. Alara unsheathed her curved blade, its edge gleaming with deadly precision. Together, they moved in perfect synchronization, silent, lethal, and unspokenly attuned. The hum grew louder, accompanied by faint, shuffling footsteps. As they rounded a corner, Marcus signaled Alara to halt, raising his weapon. A battered reconnaissance drone limped into view, its damaged chassis sparking with fading energy. It was barely operational, its sensors flickering weakly before collapsing into a heap of broken metal. Alara exhaled slowly. "Just a relic, maybe? But someone activated it recently." Marcus knelt, examining the drone's damaged circuitry. "We're not alone." Before he could say more, the ground suddenly trembled beneath them. A deep, resonant vibration that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Marcus surged to his feet, heart pounding. "We need to move. Now." As if answering his words, the far wall exploded in a shower of shattered stone, and dark, armored figures surged through the breach, faceless, relentless, and armed to kill. Their pursuers had found them at last. The explosion tore through the ancient walls, raining debris and fractured stone. Marcus threw himself against Lady Alara Vale, dragging her down behind a rusted bulkhead as shards of metal and shattered rocks screamed overhead. The ground trembled beneath them, and the flickering blue lights embedded in the old outpost's walls finally dimmed into darkness. Marcus hit the ground hard, absorbing the impact with practiced ease. Alara twisted beneath his grasp, her blade flashing instinctively, but she stilled the moment she recognized him. Their faces were inches apart, her glowing tattoos flaring brighter in response to the sudden closeness. Her breath brushed against his cheek, warm and sharp with adrenaline. "We're pinned," Marcus hissed, forcing himself to focus. Heavily armed, Alara's eyes burned fiercely. "They won't leave survivors." More armored figures poured through the breached wall, their dark exosuits glinting in the dim firelight from the damaged circuitry around them. Their movements were precise, calculated, elite killers sent with a singular purpose. "Cover me," Marcus ordered, already raising his blaster. Without waiting for a response, he fired, taking out the closest attacker with a sharp, precise shot. Alara surged to her feet, moving with liquid grace. Her blade caught the faint light as she flowed through the advancing mercenaries, her strikes fast and lethal. They fought as if they'd trained together for years, each movement instinctively complementing the other. Marcus's blaster cut down enemies from afar while Alara closed the distance with deadly precision, her glowing tattoos a radiant blur in the dark. A sudden burst of plasma fire forced Marcus to dive behind a crumbling console. The console exploded in a spray of sparks, scorching the air around him. Before he could recover, another armored assailant loomed above, weapon aimed directly at his head. In a flash of silver-blue light, Alara appeared, her blade slicing cleanly through the attacker's chest plate. The mercenary crumpled, lifeless. Marcus pushed himself up, chest heaving. "I had that." Her molten gold eyes sparkled with something dangerously close to amusement. "You were delayed." Before he could respond, another explosion rocked the chamber, collapsing part of the ceiling. Dust and smoke choked the air, cutting off their escape route. They were trapped, Alara. Back exit. Marcus pointed toward a rusted service tunnel partially hidden by fallen debris. She nodded sharply, already moving. Marcus followed close behind, blasting suppressive fire toward their attackers. Their boots pounded against the cracked stone floor as they sprinted through the dark corridor. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, its walls scarred by old battles long forgotten. The air grew colder, and the dim light from Alara's glowing tattoos became their only guide through the suffocating dark. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous expanse, an ancient subterranean chamber filled with towering, crystalline formations that pulsed faintly with stored energy. It was eerily silent, the distant echoes of pursuit fading into nothing. Marcus staggered to a stop, gasping for breath, his hands trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. He leaned heavily against one of the crystalline pillars, its cool surface a sharp contrast to the heat still burning through his veins. Alara paced a short distance away, her expression tense, shoulders tight with residual combat readiness. Her blade still dripped with dark, alien fluid, forgotten in her hand. "Are you hurt?"
"I am intact,"
Marcus asked,
she
his
replied,
voice rough, though her breathing remained uneven. He studied her for a long moment, noting the faint tremor in her fingers. It wasn't from weakness, no, Alara was stronger than anyone he'd ever met. But something deeper gnawed at her, something she was unwilling or unable to voice. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Again, her eyes narrowed. "You saved mine first." Silence stretched between them, charged and electric. The faint, pulsing light from the crystals bathed her features in ethereal silver blue, highlighting every sharp angle and soft curve. Her tattoos shimmered faintly, responding to emotions she couldn't hide. Without thinking, Marcus reached out, his fingers brushing against her forearm where her markings glowed brightest. The sensation was electric, warmth radiating from her skin like living fire. She stiffened but didn't pull away. "Your light changes," he said softly, mesmerized. "When you feel something." Her breath hitched just slightly, the soft glow intensifying beneath his touch. "It is involuntary." His fingers traced the delicate lines of her markings, marveling at the strange, intimate connection they shared. Her skin felt impossibly smooth, warm with an otherworldly heat that seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. For a moment, neither of them moved. There was only the charged silence and the steady rhythm of shared breath. "I can't control it," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "It reveals too much." Marcus's hand stilled against her skin. "Then let it." Her gaze snapped to his, molten gold eyes blazing with intensity. For the first time, she didn't retreat, didn't hide behind icy formality or sharp words. Instead, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the worn fabric of his uniform, tracing the scars beneath. Their faces hovered inches apart, the line between necessity and something far deeper blurring beyond recognition. Marcus cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing along the edge of her jaw where her markings glowed brightest. "Alara," he whispered, her name a breathless plea. Before she could answer, distant echoes of approaching footsteps shattered the fragile moment, yanking them back to reality. Their enemies were closing in once more. Without a word, they pulled apart, already moving as one, warriors forged by survival, but now bound by something far more dangerous. Undeniable, unspoken desire. The cavern's crystalline glow faded into darkness as Marcus and Alara pressed deeper into the subterranean maze. The pursuing mercenaries were relentless, their distant shouts echoing like phantom calls through the winding tunnels. Every step carried the weight of exhaustion, but neither of them faltered. Survival demanded strength and trust. The winding passages eventually opened into a grand, vaulted chamber lined with shattered statues and forgotten relics. Ancient Averii craftsmanship adorned the cracked walls, their intricate designs telling a story of lost battles and abandoned glories. Marcus recognized the place immediately, a ruined Averii war memorial, long buried beneath the desolate surface. Alara ran her fingertips over one of the broken stone tablets, her glowing tattoos dimming as her expression hardened into something distant and cold. This place meant something to you, Marcus guessed, his voice low but steady. She didn't answer at first, her hand lingering on the worn carvings. It was a symbol of our strength. Before we forgot what strength truly meant, her golden eyes flicked toward him, sharp and unreadable. Your people did not destroy this place. We did. Marcus studied her in the dim light, recognizing the heavy weight behind her words. For all her strength and fire, there was a deep, lingering sadness she carried like a blade pressed against her heart. Before he could respond, the faint hum of approaching footsteps broke through the stillness. The mercenaries were closing in again, methodical and relentless. They had tracked them through the maze-like tunnels, leaving no escape. We can't fight them all, Marcus muttered, checking his dwindling ammunition. Not here. Alara's eyes narrowed, calculating. There's another way. Without explanation, she moved toward the far wall, running her fingers across a faint, glowing seam barely visible beneath the crumbling stone. A hidden panel slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow, ancient passageway bathed in faint, pulsing light. This leads deeper, she explained. They won't follow us, not where it leads. Marcus hesitated. And what's waiting on the other side? Her expression turned grim. Judgment. The towering projection of the Averii Queen loomed over the ancient platform, her molten gold eyes blazing with imperial judgment. Her holographic form shimmered with fierce intensity, her armor glinting as though she were still flesh and blood. The air crackled with charged energy, and the chamber felt impossibly still, as if holding its breath. Alara Vale. The queen's voice resonated, cold and imperious. You bear the mark of royal blood but stand before me unworthy. Marcus shifted instinctively, placing himself between Alara and the projection, though he knew it was futile. This was no enemy he could shoot or outmaneuver. This was the unyielding past made manifest. Alara took a measured step forward, lifting her chin defiantly. I have fought for my people, for survival. Judge me for my deeds, not your forgotten laws. The queen's holographic expression twisted into something both disdainful and sorrowful. You have abandoned your destiny, and now you face the consequences. Before Alara could respond, the platform surged with blinding energy. Marcus's stomach lurched as the world around them twisted into something new. No longer the dark, ruined chamber, but a vast, gleaming hall bathed in the harsh white glow of ancient Averii architecture. The towering walls stretched into infinity, lined with flickering memory images from Alara's past. The images played in fragmented flashes, Alara standing in ceremonial armor, cold and rigid, her leading fierce battles at the Dominion's front lines, her blade striking down enemies with deadly precision, her standing alone in the aftermath, the bodies of fallen comrades littering the ground. Marcus's chest tightened at the sheer weight of loss and isolation etched into every memory. Alara's life had been war and sacrifice. Suddenly, one of the memory images twisted and surged forward, materializing into a ghostly, weapon-wielding soldier forged from Alara's most painful memories. Its hollow eyes burned with relentless hatred. Without hesitation, it lunged. Marcus shoved Alara aside just as the spectral soldier's blade sliced through the air where she had stood. He fired, but the energy rounds fizzled uselessly against its shifting form. This is my trial, Alara shouted, yanking Marcus back. You cannot fight them. Like hell I can't, Marcus snarled, rolling to his feet. He grabbed a broken shard of crystalline debris and swung it at the ghostly soldier, the jagged edge shattering against its armor, but slowing its next strike. Before it could recover, Alara surged forward, her blade flashing with deadly precision as she severed the apparition's head. It disintegrated into vapor, leaving only the echo of its hateful scream behind. Breathing hard, Marcus straightened, locking eyes with her. You're not doing this alone. Alara's jaw tightened, torn between pride and something far more vulnerable. This is not your battle. Then stop expecting me to leave, Marcus countered fiercely. For a moment, she said nothing, her expression softening in a way that made Marcus's chest ache. But the moment was shattered by another violent pulse of energy as more spectral warriors emerged from the fragmented memories, their twisted forms advancing with relentless purpose. Side by side, Marcus and Alara fought, blade and blaster, instinct and fire. Every shared breath, every exchanged glance became a promise. Neither would fall alone. The battle raged on, time stretching into an endless haze of desperate strikes and near-fatal blows. Their enemies were tireless, born from memory and regret. But Marcus and Alara fought with the ferocity of the living. As Marcus's ammunition dwindled, his mind raced for any edge, any advantage. "How do we end this?" he shouted, blocking a vicious swing with his forearm guard. Alara's expression hardened with realization. "We don't defeat them. We face them." Before he could question her meaning, she stepped forward, lowering her blade. Her glowing tattoos pulsed with steady determination, brighter and fiercer than before. "I am Alara Vale," she declared, voice steady and clear. "I will not deny my past, or run from what I am." The advancing specters hesitated, flickering uncertainly. The projection of the Averii Queen reappeared, her cold expression now tinged with something almost approving. "Alara?" Marcus took a cautious step toward her. Before he could reach her, the platform surged with one final blast of radiant light, engulfing them both. When the light faded, the vast hall of memories was gone. They stood once more in the shattered, forgotten chamber beneath the ruined outpost. The crystalline platform dimmed, its ancient purpose fulfilled. Alara staggered, but Marcus caught her, holding her steady. Her breathing was ragged, her glowing tattoos dimmed to fade. "Done," flickering she whispered, exhaustion heavy in her voice. Marcus's grip tightened protectively. "Are you sure?" The answer came not from her, but from the ancient projection of the Averii Queen, who now stood with quiet dignity, her expression free of its former harshness. "You have faced what was broken," the Queen intoned, "and found strength in something greater." Her molten gold gaze flicked briefly to Marcus before softening toward Alara. "You are worthy." With those final words, the projection dissolved into starlight, scattering like ashes in the wind. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the distant hum of ancient power finally fading into stillness. Marcus gently cupped Alara's face, forcing her gaze to meet his. Her molten gold eyes gleamed faintly, weary but fierce. "You fought for me," she whispered, her voice cracking, "even when you didn't have to." His fingers brushed along the edge of her jaw, tracing the soft glow of her markings with reverent tenderness. "You were never alone." The space between them vanished, and for the first time, Alara let herself lean into his touch, her forehead resting against his. Their breaths mingled, slow and steady. No longer warriors bound by survival, but something far more fragile and real. For a moment, there was no war, no past, no destiny, only them. And that was enough. The narrow corridor stretched endlessly, pulsing with an eerie, rhythmic energy that seemed to resonate through the stone itself. Ancient symbols etched into the walls glowed faintly with every step they took, illuminating the path ahead. They moved cautiously, senses honed by survival. The farther they descended, the thicker the air became, charged with something ancient and powerful. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by mercenaries, but by the lingering echoes of a forgotten age. After what felt like hours, the corridor widened into a massive, domed chamber filled with towering stone obelisks inscribed with alien runes. At the center stood an imposing, circular platform carved from dark, gleaming crystal. Alara approached the platform with deliberate steps, her glowing tattoos flaring brighter, as if responding to the ancient energy surrounding them. Marcus followed, unease prickling his spine. "This place, what is it?" he asked quietly. "A trial," she answered, her voice almost reverent. "A sacred place of reckoning for the Averii elite." Before Marcus could press further, the ground trembled beneath them, sending sharp vibrations through the stone floor. Glowing lines of energy surged along the walls, illuminating the ancient runes in a brilliant, blinding light. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the chamber. A mechanical, disembodied tone speaking in the ancient Averii tongue. Alara stiffened, her face tightening with grim recognition. "What's it saying?" Marcus demanded. She hesitated, then translated. Her voice strained. "It recognizes me as heir to the Dominion's throne." Marcus's mind reeled. He had known she was important, a noble, a political figure, but not this. "Your royalty? I was meant to be," she admitted quietly. "But I was never worthy." Before he could respond, the ground beneath them surged with another pulse of energy, and shimmering barriers of light erupted around the platform, trapping them within. "Prove your worth," the ancient voice commanded. The air crackled with sudden, hostile energy. From the platform's edge, shimmering, translucent figures emerged. Holographic echoes of ancient Averii warriors clad in gleaming, ceremonial armor. Their forms pulsed with unstable, flickering light, but their purpose was unmistakable. Judgment through combat. "They're testing you," Marcus realized grimly. "No," Alara corrected, her expression stealing into something fierce and unyielding. "Us." The first spectral warrior lunged, its energy blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Marcus barely dodged in time, rolling into a defensive stance as another warrior materialized behind him. He fired his blaster, but the shots passed uselessly through the shimmering figure. "Alara!" he shouted, narrowly avoiding a fatal strike. "What the hell are these things?" "Memories made real," she answered, parrying a brutal blow from another holographic warrior with her curved blade. "They are the past, demanding the future's blood." Together, they fought with brutal efficiency, Marcus's blaster providing cover, while Alara's blade carved through their enemies with deadly grace. Their every movement seemed impossibly synchronized, each anticipating the other's next step without hesitation. Despite the overwhelming odds, they held their ground, refusing to fall. Every shared glance, every exchanged breath was charged with fierce, unspoken understanding, trust forged in fire and survival. Finally, with a final, desperate strike, Alara drove her blade through the last spectral warrior, shattering its form into fragments of flickering light. The platform fell silent once more, the glowing runes dimming into darkness. Breathing hard, Marcus lowered his weapon, his gaze locking onto Alara. Her glowing tattoos pulsed faintly, their light soft but steady. She met his gaze, exhaustion and defiance burning in her molten gold eyes. "It's done," she whispered, voice hoarse but resolute. Before Marcus could respond, the ancient platform surged with one final pulse of energy, projecting a towering, regal figure made of shimmering light. An Averii queen adorned in flowing ceremonial armor, her eyes blazing with unyielding power. "Alara Vale," the projection declared, its voice cold and imperious. "Daughter of the Dominion, you cannot escape what you are." And with those words, their true reckoning began. The cavern lay silent, its ancient energies finally spent, leaving only the soft flicker of dimming crystal shards embedded in the walls. Marcus held Alara close, his hands still resting on her face as he studied her. Her glowing tattoos pulsed faintly in rhythm with her breath, but their usual brilliance had dimmed after the trial's brutal toll. "I'm all right," she whispered, though her voice trembled with fatigue. Marcus searched her eyes, unwilling to let go just yet. His calloused thumb brushed her cheek, lingering on the faint glow beneath her skin. The way she leaned into his touch, even for a moment, felt like a fragile truce, something neither of them could afford but desperately needed. Before he could speak, a deep rumble echoed from the distant tunnels, low, resonant, and unmistakably mechanical. His head snapped toward the sound, instincts firing. The mercenaries hadn't given up. They were coming. Alara straightened, forcing strength back into her weary frame. They found another way in. Marcus released her reluctantly and checked his weapon, frowning at the low power indicator. "We can't hold them off, not here." Alara moved toward a forgotten console embedded in the chamber wall, her fingertips tracing ancient glyphs until the faint hum of dormant technology sparked to life. A dim, flickering map appeared, a tangled web of long-forgotten tunnels and service shafts. "There's a relay station deep beneath this facility," she said, eyes narrowing as she traced the glowing route. "It was once connected to Dominion Command. If it still works." Marcus caught on quickly. "We send a distress signal. Blow this conspiracy wide open. Before they kill us," Alara added grimly. The distant mechanical clatter grew louder, boots pounding against stone as the mercenaries advanced. No time left. Marcus met her gaze. "Lead the way." Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the nearest corridor, Marcus close on her heels. Every step echoed through the ancient tunnels, urgency tightening their pace as they raced deeper into the forgotten depths. The air grew colder, sharper, and more electric the farther they descended. The facility's failing power systems flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows across the cracked walls. Faint traces of old Dominion tech glowed beneath layers of dust and age, like veins of forgotten energy still stubbornly clinging to life. Alara's glowing tattoos pulsed faintly, their rhythm slowing as exhaustion clawed at her strength. Marcus noticed but said nothing. Her fierce determination drove her forward, and he wouldn't insult her by suggesting otherwise. They rounded another corner just as blaster fire erupted behind them, sending sparks flying from the walls. Marcus yanked Alara behind a twisted support beam, returning fire with sharp, calculated bursts. His aim was deadly, but their enemies were too many, advancing with brutal precision. "We won't outrun them," he growled, slamming another depleted power cell into his blaster. "We need a choke point." Alara's sharp gaze locked onto a collapsed section of tunnel nearby, partially blocked by fallen rock. "There." Marcus nodded, covering her as she darted toward the makeshift barricade. Together, they hauled debris into place, forming a narrow bottleneck just as the first wave of mercenaries surged forward. Blaster fire erupted, hot and relentless. Alara moved with lethal grace, her blade flashing in deadly arcs as she cut through their attackers with merciless precision. Beside her, Marcus held the line, every shot counting as they fought like cornered wolves. But the enemy was relentless, closing the gap with brutal efficiency. Sparks flew as plasma bolts shattered against the broken walls, filling the air with smoke. Marcus shouted, catching sight of a flanking squad moving into position. He shoved her aside just as a blaster bolt scorched the wall where she'd stood. Her eyes widened, but there was no time for thanks. With a snarl, she plunged her blade into the nearest mercenary, wrenching it free in a spray of shattered armor. "Go," she commanded, breath ragged. "I'll hold them." "Not happening." Marcus fired another precision shot, taking down the lead attacker. "We finish this together." Before Alara could argue, a sudden tremor ripped through the chamber, followed by the deafening roar of collapsing stone. Their enemies hesitated just long enough for Marcus and Alara to seize the moment. "Move," Marcus barked, yanking her toward the darkened corridor beyond the ruined barricade. They raced through the crumbling tunnels, pursued by the relentless sounds of combat and falling stone. Alara's breath came in sharp gasps, her strength fading, but she pushed on with unyielding determination. Finally, the corridor widened into a cavernous control room lit by flickering emergency lights. An ancient Dominion relay station dominated the far wall, a massive, rune-covered console humming faintly with residual power. "This is it," Alara breathed, staggering toward the ancient device. Her hands trembled as she activated the interface, glyphs flaring reluctantly to life. Marcus secured the entrance, setting up a makeshift barricade from shattered equipment. He could hear the distant echoes of the mercenaries closing in, but there was no time left for caution. "Can you get a signal out?" he asked urgently. Alara's fingers flew across the ancient controls, bypassing corrupted code with practice skill. "The relay's damaged, but I can force a broadcast." A sudden warning klaxon blared as the console sparked violently, sending out a surge of unstable power. Marcus rushed to her side, steadying her just as the final transmission key activated. Broadcasting, she gasped. Coordinates sent. They'll know we're here. Before either of them could react, the far wall exploded in a shower of stone and fire. The lead mercenary captain emerged, armor scorched but intact, his weapon already raised. Marcus shoved Alara behind him, shielding her with his body even as his blaster hissed on empty. The mercenary captain sneered. Your fight's over. But even as the cold barrel of the plasma rifle trained on them, Alara's tattoos flared one last time, bright and defiant, lighting the darkness with fierce, unyielding power. The signal had been sent. Their message was out. Even if they fell, the war would not be lost. The air crackled with raw energy as the ancient relay station shuddered from the blast. Dust and shattered stone rained from the crumbling ceiling as Marcus Rowe stood protectively in front of Alara Vale. His empty blaster held firm despite the odds. The mercenary captain advanced slowly, his armored boots grinding against the shattered floor, weapon locked on them both. You put up a good fight, the captain sneered, his voice distorted by his helmet's cold vocal modulator. But you've run out of tricks. Alara's glowing tattoos flared faintly, pulsing with stubborn defiance. Even exhausted, even weaponless, she radiated the fierce presence of someone who would never surrender. Marcus squared his shoulders, shifting subtly into a defensive stance. His mind raced through every remaining option. None of them good. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered, with nothing left but the thin hope that their signal had reached someone. The mercenaries fanned out, methodically covering every possible escape route. The captain raised his plasma rifle, steady and lethal. Any last words, Admiral? Before Marcus could respond, the station's failing power grid surged violently, sending a wave of unstable energy through the chamber. Ancient consoles sparked and crackled as overloaded circuits screamed in protest. Alara's eyes widened in sudden realization. The power core. It's destabilizing. Marcus's grip tightened on his empty blaster. How bad? Minutes, maybe less. Her voice was strained but resolute. If it overloads, this entire facility goes up. The mercenary captain noticed the sudden flickering energy patterns and took a cautious step back, his rifle lowering just slightly. What did you do? He growled. Alara, Marcus said quietly, his voice calm despite the chaos. Can you trigger a controlled overload? Enough to take them out. But give us time to escape. Her glowing tattoos pulsed brighter, a mix of desperation and determination flashing in her molten gold eyes. Maybe, but I would need direct contact with the power core. It's unstable. Marcus didn't hesitate. Do it. She hesitated, her gaze locking with his, silent understanding passing between them. They both knew what the odds were. Alara stepped toward the central power console, her trembling fingers brushing against the damaged interface. The ancient system resisted her commands, sparking violently as she fought to stabilize the volatile energy flow. Marcus turned back toward the advancing mercenaries, planting himself between them and Alara with grim finality. His empty blaster wouldn't stop them, but it didn't matter. He would hold the line for as long as it took. The captain barked an order, and his men surged forward, weapons raised. Marcus dove into action with brutal efficiency, wrenching a broken support beam from the floor and using it as a makeshift weapon. His first swing shattered the nearest mercenary's helmet, sending the soldier crashing to the ground. Plasma fire erupted, forcing Marcus into desperate, calculated movements. He fought like a cornered wolf, relentless, merciless. Every swing of the shattered beam was fueled by raw survival instinct, but he couldn't hold them forever. Behind him, Alara strained against the overloaded system, her glowing tattoos flaring brighter, with every pulse of unstable energy coursing through her body. Pain twisted her features, but she didn't let go, couldn't let go. The facility's failing reactor responded to her presence, linked to her through ancient Dominion tech as if recognizing its rightful heir. Another explosion rocked the chamber, sending Marcus sprawling across the shattered floor. His weapon skidded from his grasp, leaving him defenseless as the captain closed in, plasma blade igniting with deadly precision. The mercenary captain loomed over Marcus, ready to strike. But before the killing blow could fall, a blinding surge of radiant energy erupted from the central power core, flooding the chamber with searing, electric light. Marcus shielded his eyes just as the wave of energy crashed into the advancing mercenaries, their armor sparking and failing under the sheer intensity. Their agonized screams were drowned out by the thunderous hum of the reactor reaching critical mass. Elara! Marcus forced himself to his feet, staggering toward the glowing center of the relay station. He found her collapsed against the console, her body trembling from the raw energy still surging through her veins. Her tattoos flared wildly, unstable and flickering like a dying star. Elara! He called again, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands cradled her face, his touch grounding her through the storm of chaotic power still raging within her. Her eyes fluttered open, molten gold dimmed but still fiercely alive. The signal was sent, she rasped, her voice cracked and weak. "We're not leaving without you," Marcus vowed, tightening his grip on her trembling hands. Before she could protest, he pulled her into his arms, her weakened frame fitting against him with heartbreaking fragility. The reactor's surging light flickered dangerously, the facility seconds away from complete detonation. Summoning every last shred of strength, Marcus hauled Elara to her feet, half carrying her toward the emergency access tunnel barely visible through the swirling smoke and fire. Every step felt like dragging through molten steel, but he didn't stop. Not when they were so close. They reached the tunnel just as the reactor surged into one final, blinding overload. A deafening shockwave tore through the station, obliterating everything in its path. The force of the blast hurled them into the tunnel's depths, sending them crashing against the fractured walls. Marcus shielded Elara's body with his own, absorbing the worst of the impact as the collapsing station vanished in a fiery eruption behind them. Silence fell at last, broken only by the distant crackling of fading fires. Smoke and dust choked the ruined tunnel, but they were alive. Marcus groaned, forcing himself to his knees despite the searing pain in his ribs. His heart pounded wildly as he turned toward Elara, who lay still and motionless beneath the scattered debris. "No, no, no." He crawled toward her, shaking hands brushing away the fallen stone. Her skin was cold, her glowing tattoos faint and flickering like the last embers of a dying flame. He whispered hoarsely, gathering her into his arms. His forehead rested against hers, desperation tightening his chest. "You're not leaving me. Not now. Not after everything." A faint, shimmering pulse flickered beneath his fingertips, the soft, familiar warmth of her light responding to his touch. Weak, but still there, still fighting. Marcus exhaled a shaky breath, relief crashing over him like a tidal wave. He pressed a fierce, lingering kiss against her forehead, his trembling hand cradling her face. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you." And in the suffocating darkness of the broken world around them, her light burned on. The cold wind howled through the shattered valley where the Dominion's long-forgotten relay station had once stood. Now only molten wreckage and scorched rock remained, glowing faintly under the pale light of Vareth Prime's distant sun. Smoke coiled into the frozen sky, a grim monument to the battle fought there and won. A distant hum broke the eerie stillness as sleek Interstellar Alliance rescue ships descended from the clouds, their floodlights cutting through the ash-choked air. Troopers in tactical armor disembarked swiftly, spreading out across the scorched landscape in search of survivors. At the edge of the wreckage, near the mouth of a half-collapsed access tunnel, Marcus Rowe stirred from unconsciousness. Every nerve in his body screamed with pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he forced his battered form upright. Blood crusted his temple, his uniform torn and scorched, but none of that mattered. "Elara," he rasped, his voice raw with desperation. He twisted around, eyes locking onto her still form lying half-buried beneath twisted debris a few meters away. Her normally radiant tattoos were faint, barely flickering like fading stars. For one terrifying moment he feared he was too late. With a surge of will, Marcus dragged himself toward her, collapsing beside her and cradling her fragile frame against his chest. His trembling fingers brushed her face, tracing the soft lines of her jaw where faint glimmers of light pulsed weakly beneath her translucent skin. "Alara, come on, stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We made it. You can't give up now." For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence, agonizing and absolute. Then, beneath his fingertips, the faint pulse of warmth flared once more, a soft, fragile rhythm beating against his skin. Her tattoos shimmered faintly, like dying embers catching breath in the wind. Her eyelids fluttered, molten gold eyes struggling to focus. "Marcus?" A harsh, relieved breath escaped him as he pressed his forehead against hers, holding her as though anchoring her soul with his touch. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely. "I've got you. You're safe." Alara's fingers brushed weakly against his chest, her voice barely audible. "They signal? Sent." His hand tightened around hers. "Help is here." As if on cue, Alliance medics swarmed the ruined site, pulling them both onto stretchers and stabilizing their injuries with practiced efficiency. Marcus never let go of Alara's hand, even as they were loaded into separate medical bays aboard the rescue ship. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the faint glow of her light, still burning. Days passed in a haze of recovery aboard the ISV Resolute, the flagship of the Interstellar Alliance fleet. The political fallout from the broadcasted signal had sent shockwaves through both human and Averii governments. The conspiracy behind the failed peace summit was exposed, its orchestrators unmasked and swiftly brought to justice. Against all odds, war had been averted. Marcus awoke slowly in the quiet infirmary, his injuries bound and monitored by soft, sterile machines. His first thought wasn't of politics, victory, or survival. It was Alara. He struggled upright, wincing against the sharp ache in his ribs as he scanned the empty bay. Before he could rise, the door hissed open, and there she was. Lady Alara Vale stepped into the room, her luminous tattoos glowing softly once more, their familiar pulse steady and strong. She wore a formal Averii diplomatic cloak draped over her armored frame, the regal lines of her posture softened only by the faint, uncertain hope in her molten gold eyes. Marcus exhaled sharply, disbelief and relief warring within him. "You're alive." Alara moved toward him, her steps slow but purposeful. "So are you." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of survival and sacrifice stretching between them like a fragile, unspoken thread. Then she crossed the remaining distance and knelt beside his bed, her fingers brushing his worn, calloused hand with reverent tenderness. "You should not have survived. Yet you did." "So did you?" Marcus whispered, his voice rough. Alara's expression softened, her fingertips tracing the edge of his bruised knuckles. "I thought I'd lost you. You never will." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing along the faint, glowing lines of her markings. Her breath hitched at the intimate contact, her eyes closing briefly as if savoring the warmth of his touch. When she opened them again, they burned fiercely, not with regal command or warrior's fire, but with something far deeper, something only for him. "Duty calls," she murmured, her voice trembling just slightly. "The Dominion needs me, as does your alliance." Marcus nodded slowly, his chest tightening with quiet understanding. They had saved a fragile peace, but the political divide between their worlds still remained. But no distance, no command, no empire could sever the bond forged between them. "I'll fight for this. For us," Marcus vowed softly. "No matter where they send us, I'll find you." Alara leaned in, her glowing tattoos flaring with quiet intensity as her lips brushed his, soft, fierce, and endlessly tender. Their kiss burned with all the words they couldn't say, a promise forged in fire and tempered by survival. When she finally pulled back, her forehead rested gently against his, their breaths mingling in the stillness. "No force in the universe could keep me from you," she whispered. And as the distant hum of starships thrummed through the vastness of space, their light endured.